Hi, my name is Mastaneh. I'm a certified teacher of the Alexander Technique, and today in this video I want to answer a question that was asked of me by a fellow inquirer into the work of movement with Alexander Technique. And the question was, what's your take on semi-supine? Now, if you're listening to this video, you might know that in what is the training school that I went to, that type of modern, sometimes called modern Alexander technique, the student is asked to try something out, lie on their back with their feet on the floor and their knees bent. So it's a great question. I might not be able to answer every point, but I want to share one experience or a story about my experience with the semi-supine position. And I've got, where is it? This is the reverse camera thing. Okay, I've got my friend here to help me maybe discuss some of the points that relate to my story, the story of what's your take on semi-supine. So the reason I got this guy here is because a lot of times Alexander teachers stand next to a skeleton. Now this skeleton is not actually mine. I'm borrowing it from, it's a secret actually, but it's not mine. I don't own it. And there's a little clue into what I'm going to say. I've dressed it up. I put a hat on it. Sometimes I wear this hat in this incredible sunshine that we have, and I might wear it right now because it kind of gives me the Jodie Foster taxi driver thing. And hey, you know, I'm not blonde, but I like it. So getting back to what's my take on the semi-supine position, I've written some blogs about what's my take on modern Alexander technique, and it's no secret that I've had to go a process of retraining so that I could come up with something I could teach myself and other people, my children, students, that would be measurable and would equate to the concept that we're talking about, which is teaching, learning, education. So one of the problems that I personally had with semi-supine is simply this, is that it hurt after doing it. Now I know that it's, you know, social media and all this stuff, it's the rage. You know, you lie on your back, you put your knees up, your feet are on the floor, and you put books under your head. And it's just going to, you know, it's just, and you think these words, let the neck be free, to allow the head to go forward and up, to let the back lengthen and widen. And I almost can't say those words to myself without a little bit of a chuckle nowadays. And then things are cool. Yeah, you've done your semi-supine. And some of the reasoning is someone will say, yeah, you know, this is a, you know, this is a skeleton, and you know, we've got bones in our skeleton. Wow, you know, and between the bones there are intervertebral discs, and when we go to sleep, something happens, and the space between the discs gets smaller, and what happens is that when we get up, we are a bit shorter. And when we do semi-supine, we sort of help to bring hydraulic elasticity to the intervertebral discs. Well, the thing is that we're actually learning to create movements and learning to coordinate movements in time to allow our back to lengthen and widen. So this is where my trusty little stolen bone skeleton, oh, did I say stolen? No, it's borrowed. Skeleton comes in handy, because if you like to do semi-supine to get a picture of the plumb line that we got here, go ahead, because this guy is doing a perfect job of representing what it looks like for the torso to shorten and to narrow. And also, there is no way for us to create relationships within an articulated dynamic system that this is not, but we are. This is not, and we are. Okay, we are actors. We can pretend to be characters. We can create movements. We can say yes to some things and no to other things. And this is a process that can also be called learning. Now, if you're a musician, an artist, a computer programmer, I really want to encourage you to possibly ask yourself the question, what it is to learn something. What does it mean to learn something? So getting back to what's my take on the semi-supine is that if you're like me and you usually have the scoliosis, if you're not thinking about the movements or bringing about the movements that you have studied in time and in the upright or sitting position, and going from upright sitting to standing back to sitting position as a way of studying, coordinating movements that bring length and width to the structure of the back, then lying down in semi-supine actually pushes the shoulders back. Doesn't matter if you have the books under your head. Imagine that I'm lying down. It doesn't matter if I have the books under my head. Still, my shoulders are going to go back onto the ground, and the restriction of movement that that flat floor provides me is one of the things that would create really quite horrid continuous sacroiliac pain for me. So I was a bit lucky and a bit unlucky during my training. I was a bit lucky and a bit unlucky during my training that I had 2 bouts of lung illness. One was quite serious. One almost took my life. So it was a pneumonia that wasn't caught for about 14 days. And it took me about 6 or 7 months to recover from this. So lying on my back on the floor was actually impossible, because as soon as I would do that, save if I was going to sleep in my bed, I could be on my side, and I have a nice mattress that would give me opportunities to, when you sleep, semi-supine and sleep are 2 different things. They are not the same. So as soon as I would go into the semi-supine position, I would start coughing. The lungs had been compromised for a long time, that just a recovery period would create this intense coughing. And so I'm sure some of my teachers back then was like, oh, she's not doing her work, she's not lying down, But, I would read Alexander's writing, that crazy idea, saying like, what's the guy talking about? This is not making sense. Some of it is, but where is it? What is this mechanical advantage thing that he keeps telling me about? Anyway, long story short, I would actually investigate movements. I would do hula hooping. I would watch myself in the mirror. I would read Alexander's work. I would try to work with my colleagues at the school, and maybe I have to do a different video on that. That was pretty interesting, to say the least. And so the thing is that as when I started to critique and investigate the language and the lack of process and the lack of continuity that this concept of semi-supine was holding, then I started to learn more about what this position of mechanical advantage, or as John Damasceno aptly calls it, the geometry of mechanical advantage, can create the lengthening and widening of the whole torso, which then can lead to the ability of dynamic movements happening. So I don't need to really think about whether my neck's free or not. I mean, just they used to hurt. It just didn't add up. So lying on the floor with my head on top of books and doing it was even less. Took the joy out of life, damn it, you know. So just looking at my notes. So this is actually just my take. So I really encourage you to investigate whether Alexander technique is something that you've seen and you've seen in social media, you've seen videos on, and there's been, you know, research studies and all this stuff. Whether this is something that you want to investigate and whether you have and what it's done for you, and maybe semi-supine can do wonderful things for people, and it can maybe people who are told that they're really stressed or they have a, you know, hyper nervous system or something like that, that being in semi-supine in a lesson has helped them. That's great. And I think what I used to call it was this virginal period with Alexander technique for me. It lasted from when I was introduced to it and start taking lessons in my late 20s for a little while. And then after that, you lie on the table, and my teachers would work with me a little bit. I mean, you get up, and it's like, yeah, you kind of feel light, and start walking, and there's this kind of nice kind of feeling. And then after a while, you just don't get it. You don't get that feeling anymore. And that's cool if you're in that period that for me, I call it the sort of, you know, the youthful glow of love of lying down on the table and having someone move your head. Cool. Like, love it. Do whatever you want. This is just my take on it. If you want to find out whether you can generate energy from your muscular mechanisms, which is not just one thing. Alexander just called it one thing, but it's a huge muscular mechanism, which is not just one thing. Excuse me. It is just get excited. You know, this huge conglomerate, interrelated, dynamic set of structures of muscles that connect onto each other, ligaments, the nervous systems, and the breathing mechanisms and the functional mechanisms of the liver and the kidneys. The whole fascial network that can be trained to produce structural soundness, which is probably getting closer to what Alexander referred to as having mechanical advantage. For example, some of the things that I'm always learning when I attend an Aikido session is that there's no way I could use just simple muscular force to create dynamic movement in myself so that I could have mechanical advantage created from my center to someone else's center. So these relationships are really complex, but that doesn't mean that we just lie on the floor and just say neck free, head forward, and back lengthen and widen and think that magic's going to happen. These relationships are complex. So I wonder if it's possible to seek something that matches and an educative method that helps us learn. So if you're relying on your semi-supine and you're getting something out of it and you're enjoying it, that's wonderful. That's great. But if you're having a question about it, I'm telling you that my take on it, based on what I've studied, is that, for example, the muscles of the core are not just one thing, as you know. And so if they wrap around the front of the ribs and go to the back of the body and come to the front of the pelvis, by lying on the floor, you're actually creating shortness in the back because the ribs are being pushed further up from the pelvis, even if your knees are bent. And you simply are not able to say, as John does says it so aptly, say yes to some movements and coordinate them and say no to others. And recently I was working with a friend and he wanted to practice his work, and I was like, yeah, I'll lie on the mat and we'll give each other feedback and all this. And I don't know if I'll feel great after I get up, but that's not your fault. It's just that I'm not used to lying on my back and having this non-movement, this sort of restricted movement, the top of the torso going back and the middle of the torso being pushed forward, which is what I would do anyway a lot of, and get into pain, get into trouble. And so it was fantastic because I got off the table and it was like, oh no, not that again. You know, so it's okay. I have things I can do in time. I can study my torso and give myself guidance in a real way and create movements to be able to recover from that non-dynamicness that happened in a period of 10 or 15 minutes. But my take on semi-supine is that if it gives you joy and if you're loving it, you're doing it right now, fantastic. But if you want to create wellness in your torso, you might want to learn about how you can create movements that bring about the lengthening and the widening of the torso in time. So I'm just gonna, before I finish, I'm gonna just look at my notes again. Yeah, so it's about relationships. And the relationship that I want to finish with is that if we actually, for example, if you're a musician and you're learning something, you want that learning process to go somewhere from day to day to day to day. You want to be able to aim for goals and reach them. Now, this is only my experience, and as I said, this video is about my take on semi-supine, but my experience proved to me, and I have had a number of people tell me similar experience, that throughout the 3 years of training, 4 days a week, 16 hours, 36 weeks times 3, 16 hours a week, for 30 weeks, 36 weeks a year, maybe 38 weeks a year times 3. During that training, I did not realistically find out what head forward and up, back lengthen and widen required, aside from a teacher's hand. And so where I've had a great realization over time that there are things that I can study that have enabled me to be stronger, not just in my body, but also stronger in the things that I want to aim for in my creative life, and be able to know that I can improve from day to day to day to day. Anything that I can learn, from cooking to learning to be a better composer and a better guitarist, have to rely on a system that can make sense. And I know that maybe some people will say, well, you know, Alexander Technique has got sort of mysteries, and it's got this kind of, you know, this kind of sense of mystery, and this, like, you know, this aura, and it's like, it's not everything makes sense. And so I've done a bit of research on that too. I've done a bit of research on the history of that mindset, and you know, that kind of thing runs right through practices like Aikido martial arts, and I have been able to make some experiments and prove some things in that realm, and they kind of have unraveled the so-called mystery of, some things just don't make sense. You just need to come for more lessons, Mastaneh. Well, it's been a great journey the last few years to say no to that in a really positive and enlivening way. And hats off to the concept of learning. Hats off to you for having watched. And I really would love to know what it is that for you makes sense in relation to semi-supine, if you do it. And also, probably a bigger question, what is it that makes sense to you in relation to what you call learning, what you call education? Thank you so much for watching. This has been my take on semi-supine. Thank you so much to Sam for asking this wonderful question. And the last thing I want to finish with is that there's a lot of disciplines out there, a lot of people wanting to do some wonderful things like, mind-body centering and dance-related or Alexander-related, somatic sort of things. And, they get out a little skeleton and they kind of like talk to the skeleton and And I've just done a bit of that to say that we are not just the skeleton, okay? And so these theories about how we go to sleep and things shrink and we just, need Alexander technique to get us back up again and stuff is kind of like, my take on it is that it's a really good way for a few people to have a way of paying the rent, but maybe it deserves a little bit of inquiry. So remember that you are not a skeleton, you are a human being, and it's your brain and your ability to act that creates movements, specific movements that allow your body's structures to grow in strength and steadiness. So what I like to say to myself sometimes, core up, ladies and gentlemen. Core up and stand up for what you believe in. A lot of my colleagues are not going to like this video. Thank you for watching. Thumbs up if you like it, share, and remember the question, what is it for you that defines learning? Kind of not a simple question, but I'd love to hear your answer. Take care. Bye.